Hello, good evening. I am Nadine Carty-Keynes, and thank you for joining us at the Nevis Emergency Operations Center, EOC, today, 28th of September 2020, for an update on the situation regarding the novel coronavirus, COVID-19, on Nevis. I want to take this opportunity to welcome all the viewers and media houses that have joined us virtually. All questions, as you know, are taken at the end, and we will try to answer as best as possible. The Nevis COVID-19 briefing will be aired on Mondays at 8:30 p.m. on Nevis Television. Or you can look for the briefings on the YouTube channel and Facebook pages of Nevis Television, Nevis HPU, NDMD, and of course on Von Radio every Tuesday at 1 p.m. This evening we have a very short program. We have Mr. Brian Dyer, of course, who is the Director of the Emergency Operations Center here on Nevis. We have Superintendent David, who is in charge of Division C of the Royal and St. Kitts and Nevis Police Force. And of course, Dr. Judy Nisbet, who is the chair of the Nevis COVID-19 Task Force, here with us this evening. I'd now like to welcome Mr. Brian Dyer, who will provide his updates as usual.
Good evening, all. As usual, we'd like to start with some weather information. Presently, there is no tropical weather system in the Atlantic that we have to monitor at this time. However, there is a tropical wave in nearing the Yucatan Peninsula that would be affecting the Central American and Mexico in a couple of days' time. However, we continue to monitor the Atlantic nonetheless for anything that may develop. Moving on, the weather-related again, the Caribbean Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology has issued its rainfall frequency and extreme forecast for wet days and wet spells outlooks for October to December 2020. The wet day frequency for October to December 2020 shows that usually there are 92 days in October to December. Out of that 92 days, there are usually 35 to 50 days that are wet. The forecast for this period, October, November, and December, rainfall may be wetter than usual across most of the region, with little indication or any change in wet days. That means there should be no concern for drought in the last 3 months of the year. Usually between 3 to 6 wet spells between the coastal of Guyana and the ABC Islands. October, November, and December, rainfall may be wetter than usual across most of the region, with little indication of change in wet days from the usual numbers. An increase compared to usual number of wet spells is forecast across the Eastern Caribbean, along with possible slight increase in very wet spells across most of the region. So that's good news for our water department and the farmers for the last 3 months of the year. All right, now we'd like to switch to a project that concluded on Nevis yesterday. The Department of Environment on St. Kitts executed its climate change adaptation project entitled Ensuring Water Security in Vulnerable Schools in St. Kitts and Nevis through on-site water storage capacity. This project saw the installation and retrofitting works were completed on Nevis yesterday, Sunday. This project has increased the availability and sustainable management of safe water at 6 schools here on Nevis and 11 schools on St. Kitts. The project was funded by the USAID in collaboration with the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, or 5Cs, at an estimated cost of some $200,000. The project involved retrofitting existing systems at the Charlestown Primary School, the Cicely Brown Integrated School, Ivor Walters Primary, and St. James Primary School. The installation of water tanks were done at the Charlestown Secondary School and Charlestown Preschool. The training component and the formal handing over ceremony will be announced at a later date. However, the disaster management would like to extend its profound thanks and sincere appreciation to the Department of Environment on St. Kitts, the Ministry and Department of Education on Nevis, the Water Department and Water Project Office on Nevis, the contractor Waterworks of St. Kitts, subcontractor Mr. Judy Nisbet on Nevis, Department of Physical Planning and Public Works Department for their collaborative effort in bringing this project to fruition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dyer, for your updates. And now I'd like to welcome Superintendent David, who will provide his updates.
Thank you very much, Nadine, and good evening all. It's a pleasure to be back to share with you some information. And as usual, we'll first start with our statistical information. I will just give you just the change in one that we had, and that will be our mobile patrols and foot patrols. We are now at 1,847. The other information, they remain the same, and I will now move on to the rest of my presentation. Statutory Rules and Orders number 42 of 2020, Emergency Powers COVID-19 number 15 regulations is now into operation. And this came into effect from 12:01 a.m. on Sunday the 27th of September and will expire at midnight on Sunday the 18th of October 2020. We are now in our second phase of reopening of businesses and enterprises in accordance with the provisions of these regulations. I would say that hotels may apply for approval to reopen during the second phase of reopening period, and they also must apply to the Ministry of Tourism to reopen during the period of the second phase of reopening and shall comply with the minimum standards set out in Schedule 3 and Part 1. So I'm saying to you, business owners, get a copy of the document, look and see what Schedule 3 Part 1 is saying, and ensure that you are right there with the minimum standard that is required of you. The provisions, the previous protocols, they remain the same, as well as the penalties and fixed penalty. And also you can have arrests and summonses if anyone break these regulations or breach them. So encouraging all to comply with the regulations. Private parties, beach parties, picnics, banquets, balls, receptions, other ceremonial activities, fraternal society, private or social club or civic association organizations, and any other type of social event are still restricted activities. However, if someone desires to conduct any of these activities, you are required to make that application to the Commissioner of Police, who will either approve or deny your request. Based on many breaches we have seen previously, we made some changes. We promised that we would have made some changes to our provisions in terms of the police force, and we have done so. And there are some persons who would have applied, and some of your requests were denied. We are saying that as we continue to go forward and realizing that persons are willing to comply and ready for the reopening of our borders, that we know that we would not have any challenges. So we are encouraging persons to ensure that you are fully equipped or prepared for the reopening of our borders. It has been observed that many businesses or establishments are not enforcing the wearing of masks. I may see a sign, but yes, still you go inside those establishments, you wonder if someone might have missed it or something. So your signages must be clear, large enough that persons can see, and have someone to enforce it. You need to speak to your tellers, you need to speak to your store staff and managers, and when these things are happening, you either ask the person to leave, and if they give some difficulty, please call the police for further assistance. Remember, you're part of this entire process, and if you're failed, that means we will fail. So you have to help in this process. Give some more efforts so that we can get it work. All heads of sporting bodies are encouraged to follow the protocols, communicate with the Ministry of Sports and the National COVID Task Force. Also, those over here on Nevis, ask questions of the Nevis COVID Task Force and the compliance unit so that you can ensure that you are in compliance with what is set out in these regulations. Today, I will just take some time to deal with domestic travel. Based on my observation, it is necessary. This is what the document is saying, our current regulation. No person shall offer for hire or seek to travel on any motor omnibus, any hiring car, taxi, any passenger ferry or catamaran unless all persons wear masks at all times pursuant to Regulation 15. B. Windows remain open or partially open depending on the weather conditions. C. All persons shall practice good hand hygiene, proper sanitary behavior and social distancing protocols in accordance with Regulations 5 and 7 and Schedule 1. So, ensure you have your hand sanitizing stations. I see that at times. Ensure people who are going to come onto the vessel, into the bus or the taxi, they're wearing their mask. Failure to do so, you have the authority to tell them you are not allowed. You can give them back the money if you so wish, but comply. Better you comply with this than them and you have a hefty fine to pay. I will now let you know of the power of the National COVID Task Force and Compliance Team according to these regulations. 1. The National COVID Task Force may A. Inspect or visit any business, any enterprise to ensure compliance with the provisions of these regulations. And when I say National Task Force, we know too that we have a task force on Nevis, so they will complement the National Task Force and assist in that area to ensure that throughout the entire federation we have compliance. B. Be consulted to assist businesses and enterprise to comply with the provisions of these regulations. And a person, now this is what I want a person to understand very carefully. A person who obstructs any member of the National COVID Task Force commits an offense and is liable and summary conviction to a fine under these regulations. So the fine or penalty under Regulation 21. 2. The compliance team may visit or inspect any business, enterprise, or any social event to ensure compliance with the provisions of these regulations, and a person who obstructs any member of the compliance team commits an offense and is liable and summary conviction to a fine under Regulation 21. I'm saying to you, whenever you see members of from the authorities on both islands come to inspect or enforce, comply, don't give any trouble. Do not try to be the lawmaker and say, okay, this is what should be, I think. They are saying to you, and I am saying to you, that the regulation says thus, and you have a duty to comply. I take this opportunity in conclusion to thank God for his continued mercies in our federation. We have seen where, though we have cases, we're not seeing it in the wider community that will create problems, so that Dr. Judy and her team will have to do a lot of contact tracing. We also thank the governments, both local and federal alike, for their various assistance in these regards. The staff of the Royal St. Christopher Nevis Police Force here on Ireland, medical staff headed by Dr. Judy Nisbet, the disaster staff headed by Mr. Brian Dyer, and we also look at other essential workers who are out there continuing to ensure that we get things right. The media for assisting us in getting our information out to the wider public and to the world. Those citizens who continue to support us, we are saying to you, continue to do so. We appreciate your help. We know that you're concerned about your country and you want to see everything go well. So we thank you for your commitment. Those violators, we are saying to you, look at the bigger picture. Look and see what has happened around the world. You have seen where countries would have opened up, or many people would have refuse to comply. Those who refuse to comply, many of them end up, sadly, were infected with COVID. Some of their family members and some of them are not here with us today. So we are saying to you, protect our federation. And remember, it starts with you. Thank you very much, and do enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you so much, Superintendent David. I'd now like to welcome our final speaker, Dr. Judy Nisbet, who will provide her updates.
Thank you, Mrs. Carty-Keynes, and good evening to everyone. As of today, Monday, 28th September, the World Health Organization has reported that since the pandemic started, there have been 33,034,598 cases worldwide. This is an additional 3 million cases in 1 week. Deaths worldwide have risen to 996,342 during the last week. The last report of the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARPHA, states that as of September 21st, there have been 206,784 cases in the Caribbean region. 119,656 of these persons have recovered, and there have been 3,588 deaths. On Nevis, we have tested so far 389 persons with 381 testing negative and 6 persons testing positive. Of these, 4 are fully recovered and 2 persons remain in isolation and are doing well and without symptoms at this time. We have 2 tests pending. We have since March released 391 persons from quarantine, and there are currently 13 persons in quarantine. Since we have started the repatriation process, we have repatriated 185 persons over a 150-day period. 171 of these repatriated persons have tested negative, and they have been released from quarantine. While we are on repatriation, as we recall, a decision was made to close the borders in March, and that was a decision taken at very short notice to prevent the importation of cases into our country. We subsequently made a decision to allow the repatriation of citizens and residents stuck abroad due to the closure of our borders. And this decision has benefited many, as has the decision to accommodate repatriated persons free of cost at the Potworks Estates apartments. Most, if not all, residents and citizens who are normally resident here and disadvantaged due to the closure of the borders have now returned. A decision has therefore been taken to start collecting a fee for quarantine for the use of Potworks Estates apartments for quarantine. The fee is US $400 for the period of quarantine. And this is to be paid by all categories of applicants. This is in addition to the cost of the test that is taken at the end of the quarantine period, or any test that's taken in the event that persons develop symptoms, for example. And this test costs EC $270. which is about 100 US. So in total, persons who are going to be quarantined at the Potworks Estates Apartments starting October 1st will pay $400 for the quarantine period and $100 for the test. Now, persons who are 12 years and under will be exempted from the test, paying for the test, but all other persons will be required to pay the fee for the test. Persons who are seeking information regarding repatriation, please remember that you can email COVID-19 Task Force at niagov.com, and in that email, state your query and you will be answered. And this includes persons who are interested in home quarantine also. So COVID-19 Task Force at niagov.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Judy Nisbet, for your updates. I'd now like to open up for any questions that our media persons may have of the presenters. Shamika Budgeon of Vaughan Radio, can you provide an update in terms of how are the 2 current COVID-19 cases are doing?
Thank you, Shamika. As I would have said, the 2 cases presented with very mild symptoms at the start when we tested them. They are doing well. They currently have no symptoms and are recovering well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Judy Nisbet. Another question for Dr. Nisbet. Even though the main focus is on coronavirus, COVID-19, we are currently seeing an influx of mosquitoes on the island. Can you let the public know if there are any dengue fever on the island or in the Federation, and also provide some of the ways that persons can stop or prevent mosquito breeding? Thank you for your question, Shamika.
It's the wet season. Rains have started to fall, and we are seeing an increase in mosquitoes on the island. We have not had any reports of dengue fever. However, as you would be aware, and the public would be aware, we do have vector control teams that go out and inspect premises and look for mosquito breeding. Once the indices are high, we then target areas for example, fogging. However, we try to avoid fogging. And we do that by asking persons to do what is necessary to prevent breeding. So we focus a lot on what we call source reduction. It means then that persons are reminded that they need to discard of old tins, coconut shells, styrofoam containers, for example. Anything that is going to cause collection of water, and because mosquitoes, the Aedes aegypti, breeds in still and stagnant water. So we ask persons to clean up their surroundings and ensure that they have no breeding sites around them. If they are collecting water, we ask them to put a net over the drum, for example, so that mosquitoes cannot get into the drums to breed. Change the water for their pets often, so that there's no water, stagnant water, so you can throw out the water so that there's no breeding, and if you change the water often. So those are some of the things that we ask persons to do. Most persons are quite familiar with what they need to do to prevent the breeding of mosquitoes on their premises. And so we ask persons to continue to do this and to support us in the Ministry of Health so that we can have a healthy environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nisbet. We have a question from Danielle Moore of On Radio. A number of school students that utilize the public transportation and commute to school part of the way have been observed not in compliance with the wearing of masks outdoors. Will any measures be taken to reduce this practice?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for that question. As we look at it in terms of the school children on the school buses, on the school premises, we are saying to the principals and the bus driver to ensure that the students entering the bus and entering the school premises are complying with the protocols that are required. As to the public, once they leave home, they're still in charge, being responsible for by the parents. Leaving school, the teachers. So teachers and parents alike are encouraged at this time to ensure that the children are taking these precautions very seriously. We, at this time, we want to say to them, as a police force, to be responsible citizens. Remember, your age at this time is very important. The research has shown, based on what is being said globally, a child or a young person may not develop certain complications as would persons who are in that category who have to be very careful, but you can take it home. And when you take it home, you may have a very old person, you may have a very sick person, and then we see what the consequences are. So we're saying to you, be responsible and comply with the wearing of masks in public places. So I want to thank you for that question, and I'm encouraging the children, be responsible and avoid any difficulty with persons in authority. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Superintendent David. I want to say thank you to all of our presenters, and thank you to the Media House of On Radio and all our other media houses that would join us for this briefing, for your participation and your questions. I want to also remind persons of the COVID-19 preventative measures of washing your hands with soap and water, covering your cough and sneeze, avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth with unclean hands, disinfect touch areas and surfaces often, practice physical distancing, use of a face mask or covering when in public spaces, and stay home if you are feeling ill. I'll take this opportunity to thank the Nevis Disaster Management, Nevis Television, Caribbean Digital Display Limited for the visual effect, Cornerstone for the backdrops, and the staff at the Health Promotion Unit, and of course the COVID-19 Task Force here on Nevis for making this briefing possible. I am Nadine Carty-Keynes, and please join us again on Monday at 8:30 p.m. on Nevis Television for another Nevis COVID-19 EOC briefing. Thank you for viewing, and please do stay safe.